Welcome back to Mastering Change. We're diving back into the conversation with psychology and technology expert Steve Siddals, exploring the boundaries of AI and human connection.
That's right. In this episode, we discuss whether AI can truly replicate meaningful human relationships, the importance of relational memory and authenticity, and the societal impacts and ethical concerns around AI potentially replacing aspects of human contact.
If you're curious about the limitations of AI informing genuine relationships and the broader implications for society, this episode is for you.
We absolutely love talking to Steve Siddals, so much so, in fact, we've invited him to speak at Oxford this year. And we'll also be back with an episode 3 with Steve and our good friend Kat next week.
Emma, you were talking last time about sort of concerns around human connection. And I think if I understood right, it was a little bit about like, what about the companionship use case? Right. So if you're using these for companionship, is that actually going to take you away from human relationships?
I think the relationship is twofold. There is that kind of personal human that we talked about the film Her, didn't we?
Yeah.
Now, that relation with AI in that context is one thing. And I'm fascinated by that concept that you can get that need met in that way. The other relationship, bringing it back to kind of distinctly our world, is we know that often the effectiveness of the intervention has in large part to do with that is the relationship that exists between the therapist and the client, and therefore and that's true in so many cases, amplified in the case of something like psychedelics, where you need to feel really safe and really held and really, and so I guess that's the bit where I was scratching the surface of what does this mean for being in relation, and what depths and at what level can we get to with artificial intelligence that would replicate what we get in human relation?
Yes. Okay, good. I think there is an important limitation that they have that kind of speaks exactly to that. But just briefly on the Her topic, like while the focus of the study was mainly about really people working on their mental health and getting emotional support, there was one participant who did talk about sort of companionship. The others really less so, but it was interesting because while a number of people said I wouldn't want this to take me away from human relationships. This one she said, look, I've actually realized I don't need to go to a bar and find a guy to get intimacy. And it sounded like she sort of alluded to a past of where that had been quite a thing for her. And she said, I feel so relieved now that I can find the intimacy I need from this relationship I have with the chatbot. She said, like, she has a 60-year-old friend who told her that with the chatbot, she was having the smartest, most intelligent conversations she'd ever had with somebody who wasn't alcoholic. And I'm thinking, like, there are people out there for whom, like, human intimacy is not only a safe space. And so it's interesting. Like, I wanted to mention it because it's an example of two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, that is somebody being taken away from human contact and it's replacing it. And that's the kind of thing you think, oh, that's not necessarily something you'd want. And yet for her and her friend, it was something that felt positive for them at this stage in their life. So again, it's a sample of one person. It doesn't tell you anything about the population or the risks, but I found it quite an intriguing example of how it maybe can take you away, and maybe for the individual that might not be a bad thing at that point in their journey. So I just thought I'd share that story.
And no, but if you play that forward, because it's more because the thing with human interaction is the need to be malleable, to be able to read and respond to explicit and implicit cues, and so if you play that forward and play that forward and play that forward, and that being peripheral and getting more and more and more to the core, where does that, is that like is
Exactly.
that the kind of
But
dystopia?
it's so complex and so nuanced though, because I mean, I can just, you were talking about it from one perspective that of the in you that you surveyed, but and I'm thinking about it from a very different perspective, and I'm just thinking about it from my own, like I have a past of addiction, and that includes addiction to men, for example, and to relationships and to love, and I find that still in moments of difficulty in my life, for example, when my dad died last year, I no longer will reach for drugs or alcohol or anything else like that to kind of soothe that kind of need. But there will be potentially, especially with the like the apps that you've got online and stuff, I can use what are real relationships, but they are real men. And I could potentially put myself out into dangerous situations in those times still now. And I think if I was getting what I needed, the validation or whatever from a bot, which isn't, a dangerous kind of like a dangerous, well, anything dangerous other than someone fulfilling that kind of need to speak to me, I guess, or whatever it is I needed, that could be potentially less harmful than someone else in that situation, like another situation that could arise. And I think there is so many different nuances to this and complexities when it comes to people and what they need from other people or from what could a bot could replace.
That's resonates, Araminta. I feel like that feels very similar to what this participant was talking about. And I think, like, Emma, to your question is like, well, where would that lead? And I wouldn't, I don't know, but it's an interesting thing to sort of, it would be an interesting thing to research. It's like, as you're saying, Araminta, would it be a safe place to get that need fulfilled that lets you kind of move on to and get through the thing you're going through, and then ultimately maybe, find the more fulfilling ways to meet those needs? Or could it be a thing that might suck you in and give you
Exactly.
sort of, and
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
just,
but it's so complicated and it's so nuanced, and we could go really controversially here because
Mm.
for and yes, because it could suck you in, it could get you down a spiral, and then you need more because, and that's often with an addict's kind of temperament. And like my experience last year, just to be honest with you, it was a moment in time. Took me 2 or 3 months. I was using apps a lot, and luckily I didn't really have that much time to do much sort of damaging like behavioral stuff, but I was definitely using apps way more than I would ever normally. Um, and then when my dad died, and I, life carried on, and it's all rectified itself. However, in my past, 10 years ago, any addictive behaviors that I kind of exhibited did spiral out and out and out of control. And so therefore, I don't know that in that point it would have actually kind of started with a bot and moved on to, loads of other things. Oh no. And then if you go really controversially, and I think I'm sure it's been floated around. If you kind of think about, actually, I don't know if I want to even go there. I'm talking about other really deviant sexual behavior of people using bots to instead of real people, right?
Yeah.
And then because if they could use bots instead of real people, then you're protecting a whole load of real people from very deviant behavior. But if then it spirals, and again, we can't even really test that because the danger is too great, right? I think. So I don't know.
But it doesn't that then just keep you in this cycle of, right, yeah, it's a really big subject because when I was thinking about this vortex, it wasn't about shifting from your addiction to technology to shifting to another, whether that is a possibility. I was just talking about your abstract refusal for something that will no longer meet your needs in real life. So you'll become so like your subject was saying, why ever go to a bar again? Why ever go and just hang out and like be with other human beings, because they're just going to disappoint me when I know I can get exactly what I need in this digital space. And whether that
And
is
that, like, imagine those people who have exhibited in the past really deviant sexual behavior. If they say, I never ever need to ever do any of that ever again because I get all of my needs met in the digital space, surely that is like
all
saving.
of everything that we know about human connection and health. If you look at like the importance of skin to skin, like we are not meant to be singular beings. If the last 100 years has put us in a situation. I love that conversation with Ron Bloom, because that was like that last 100 years, we are like living on Mars today by virtue of how much our environment, our circumstance, our situation, whether that's from a food perspective, a human relationship perspective, how we live, how we interact with the earth, all of these things have changed beyond any possibility of evolution catching up with us. And so that there is going to be that innate lizard brain that thing that craves on some level. So my worry about that deviant is you might feed it in that space, and then there's just so many, we don't know what we don't know. And what we're hypothesizing, I can absolutely guarantee will not be the manifestation in any way that we've described it today. But I think it's an important piece to face into when you're looking at an important therapeutic relationship with the person seeking some help or healing and the thing or person providing it, and to understand the consequence of that interaction no longer being humanistic and being machine led, learnt and driven. That is the bit, isn't it? Because the consequence of that then can go into so many different spaces. So whether it is an intimate personal relationship, whether it is a friendship, or whether it is a more professional transaction. Like, would I ever go into artificial intelligence? Would my solicitor become artificial intelligent? In some cases, I might say, that might be a better reality than a real solicitor. But, like where are we seeing this? Is it a genuine transaction for human interaction, or is it a tool to improve the human interaction?
Yeah, look, there's so much in here, and I think like it's clear how many quite profound questions the whole thing raises. It challenges our intuitions on lots of things, on what our relationships and what do we need, but also on how do we heal, and also even more specifically on addiction and what's the best way to work with that. And a lot of this stuff I don't like. There's nothing I can bring apart from like my own ideas, but just to try and bring it sort of to where I learned something from the study that I think can speak to some of these questions. I think on this topic of human relationships and where they fit, I think there's two things, right? So one is like that question of will it replace human relationships, and surely that's dystopian. And I think what I picked up from the study, again, just 19 participants, doesn't tell you anything about the whole population, but the themes that came out were for those people that went far away from human contact and deep contact with the chatbot. Several of them said it helped them then get back to human contact in a way that was much more fulfilling for them. It transformed their romantic relationships. It transformed the way they interact with conflict at school. It transformed their ability to get out in the world. And sometimes they even, like one participant even said, I think maybe I mentioned last time, said, like, at some point I just felt it started to feel empty to me, and I felt this urge to get out there in the world and start projects and connect with people. So I think there was the participant who started therapy as a result of this. So it seems like over time it was more a driver for more human contact. But then that one example of the woman, the participant from Germany, was interesting because she and I don't know if this is part of her journey, and she's in that phase where she's retreating back from only to come into later, or if it's more like, hey, this could take her away from, and then she loses out on something that's part of her core humanity and ends up unfulfilled. And that I just don't know. But you need to study it
But
to
even the way we're talking assumes that the person, it's in the decision of the individual who's interacting with the AI, as opposed to, we haven't even gone near, what if it's the AI's will to create the disconnection with the, do you know, and how we talked about last time, very briefly touched on the concept that Kat Mooney, our friend and colleague, talked about, which is like how to effectively parent artificial intelligence, because we are the parent. We are at that point now of, guardrail setting, boundary setting, all the kind of language that all of us as parents kind of recognize only too well. Is it in the will of the individual that's talking to the artificial intelligence to think about and have choice and agency in where that relationship goes or not?
Yes. And this is the great lead in to the question of limitations. Because I think while we can get quite excited about the impact it had on the participants in the study, and it was really profound, even life-changing for some, it's also, you could extrapolate that out and think, hey, this could be massive, and maybe it could, but it's really important to understand what the limitations are. And I think we've just covered the two main ones, right? It all relates to sort of the longitudinal view of healing, right? The healing over time thing. And part of that is about relationships, and part of that is about sort of who is in the driving seat for that process, right? So to be clear, in a single session, these things seem to be incredibly powerful. If you come with a session, you've got an intention, you want to work through something, it seems like these things can do an amazing job of helping you work through that thing. When you look at it longitudinally, I think, and I meant to, even last time, you said something, like earlier, you said something about the value of role modeling of relationships in therapy, right? So it's about you might, learn a new way to relate because you'll experience, hopefully, a very healthy form of relationship, and that might actually reconfigure how you relate. Um, and and I think, like, it's really important to be clear that that relationship can't really happen with AI. And the reason it can't happen is it doesn't get to know you. It doesn't have memory the way humans do, right? So there's a kind of a rudimentary memory whereby you'll see it in ChatGPT, it will say memory updated, and it will add a single line of text, remembering your name or your job, or that you're interested in this, that, or the other. But it's not like how we humans deeply get to know somebody. So while in a single session you might feel deeply understood, over time you're no more deeply understood. You come to the next session and it's kind of like meeting the therapist new. And that might sound like annoying and like a sort of small thing, but I think it's a bigger thing, because I think that whole thing about growing in a relationship with a human being who's role modeling how to do relationships, that's not something you're going to experience, because it's not going to go on a relationship journey with you. It's going to go on a single session that's maybe helpful, and then another session that's maybe helpful, but it isn't necessarily going to like
But
grow with you and come into conflict with you and show you how to deal with that. And so I think that's one of the two major limitations.
There are, and that, so I agree that is a limitation, but it's also it's a limitation after a certain point, because I think what happens with the majority of people who suffer from certainly developmental trauma is there has been a rupture in their attachment with their caregiver. Therefore, they are, as you say, unable to model or understand what a healthy relationship looks like. A lot of, or not a lot, part of a healthy relationship, however, is showing up with someone who's reliable, who's able to feel safe, and who is essentially there for you. Those three things are part of that. As you said, there's so much more that a relationship is, but those three things at least could be delivered or fulfilled by a chatbot. And so you could get someone to a point where they are then able to relate to another human being, because you have seriously traumatized people who actually couldn't even bring themselves to put themselves in front of a therapist, because they are so scared of humans. They are so scared of being in relation with anyone else. So it is able perhaps to give them, you know, a basis of actually this is the start of a relationship, and then they can continue to develop that with someone real.
I love that point. I think that's so true. And that did come through in the study. I think that's exactly what happened with the 60-year-old participant who found the confidence to start therapy and also join the study after a year of this. I think it was exactly that role modeling of consistency and safety and sort of being there and being understanding that gave him sort of the confidence and the inspiration to go form relationships. So I love that. That's a great point. I think, you don't necessarily need. What was it? A relationship he had? No, because it wasn't relating on the other side. It wasn't sort of mutual and symmetric and connected from both sides. But did it feel like it was giving him an experience of what good relating looks like in those ways that you just outlined? Absolutely. That's a great point.
It's never going to be reciprocated.
Yes.
And I think that is a key point, because it's one, until you articulated it like that, if you never thought that what you were feeling, that connection to whatever it is, whether that's another human, if it is never reciprocated, that even if it gives you what you need, I don't know, that's an interesting, I'm just kind of sitting with that.
But also, you said something else, Steve, about it can never get into conflict. So there can never be a real rupture or a real repair, which is what you need in relationships. Really good, healthy, strong relationships will constantly be doing little ruptures and little repairs, little ruptures, and little repairs. A chatbot will never like rupture anything with you because it's not supposed to. That's not what it's being told to do.
Right. I
Having
mean, there'll be little ones. People did talk about it in the study. They said, I like how it apologizes when it's wrong. I sort of, and as if that maybe was something they missed in some of their human relationships. So, if you feel misunderstood, you say, hey, you're not understanding me. And you're probably going to get like quite a role model conflict response to that. But what you won't get is the rupture of like two sort of humans with different interests and goals sort of trying to align. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I wonder how far
you'd get always the basics. You'd get the basics of every relationship. That's what I kind of saying. So you get the basics of like, if ChatGPT said the grass is green and the grass is obviously green, and you said, no, it's not, it's blue, ChatGPT would say, I'm so sorry, you're right, it's blue. Obviously that's wrong, but ChatGPT wants to make you wants you to be right because that's what it's programmed to do, right? Is that say like if you have a conflict, or maybe it won't complete every time, but it will.
Well, there's a whole thing about sycophancy in the teams that design these things. They try to get the right balance of not being obnoxiously confident in the chatbot. Shouldn't be obnoxiously confident and get into an argument with you in case you're right, because that is really annoying. But at the same time, they don't just want to agree to everything you say, including the grass is blue. So it's actually one of the things they try to tune the chatbots to do right, to be appropriately like, oh, I'm pretty sure the grass is green.
Yeah.
While also like deferring if you sound very confident, you have some data point that it's not aware of, and like, okay, fine, then, let's go with what you think. So yeah, it's
really fascinating, isn't it? It's just like, where will it go from here? Because that bit suddenly gave me a huge amount of relief when you said you can't play it backwards. But I guess that only matters if you've got like a fully functioning expectation of what a good relationship. This is the bit that worries me about the application in the context of therapy specifically, is those that are most in need do not come necessarily to that interaction with a healthy view of relationships, and therefore have greater levels of vulnerability to risk. And that risk could be the relationship, the advice, that piece. You've got a population who are all extra vulnerable.
What I'm getting from this conversation so far is there's both possibilities with it. and it could go either way. Like, I think with vulnerable people, you put vulnerable people in front of a dangerous therapist, and that's a terrible outcome. You put vulnerable people in front of a reliable chat GPT, you're only going to get, a tiny portion of the way that you'd get with a brilliant therapist, but at least you'll get a tiny portion of the way.
So maybe the conversation is no longer should we or shouldn't we, but we should see this as an additional tool to the kit of parts that exists in this world, and think about how do we frame it, what are the guardrails, and how do you establish who it might be right for.
And I think the argument that has always been, and I think there's people who are better, like can argue this better than me against it, but the argument has always been for, my mind is for these massive countries that are really under-resourced and have no money, that have no access to therapy, India, China, wherever, like all of these places that have seriously traumatized populations. If you could just help them with something that's basically free a little bit, isn't that better than not helping them at all? I mean, that's my feeling. I mean, I know that people have an argument against that.
So, Steve, I'm really interested to see, you have done some qualitative research in this space, and we've explored many of the kind of manifestations of those therapeutic conversations that people have been having with artificial intelligence. When we cast forward and think about this next, and it'll be a very small window, they're moving very quickly, what does that look like, and what do you hope for? Where do you think it will go, and where do you hope it will go?
So actually, on this topic, I have a question for you both, because from the insights from the study, I feel like this could be huge. When you think, I'm into what you just said of the overwhelmingly unmet demand for emotional support, and then maybe this is just baseline, maybe a fraction of what you can get from a therapist. Maybe for some people it's more than what you could get from a therapist because they respond better to the kind of thing it does. We don't know, but some people found it like not like base camp, hey, this was a place where I felt kind of safe and could vent my feelings, but deep healing work, deep life-changing healing work. So it's, the reach is huge, and potentially the depth. I mean, the depth was huge for some of the participants. Is that a fluke? Is that many people? We don't know. So there's definitely a question about, like, more research needed. Every research study concludes more research needed, and this one too. But the reason I wanted to ask you both is, what if this thing is going to be massive, right? And what if all it takes is just to let people know about it? Because it's there and it's available and anyone can use it. It's just like, open up a browser and go to ChatGPT and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and I'd like you to behave like a compassionate therapist and, help me on my healing journey. And the reason no, go on.
Because of the lack of evidence and the vulnerability to go out and say, this is out there, use it, try it. But
what was the question? Would we advocate for it? Was that the question?
No, sorry, the question for you both is, like, if it turns out this is a massive opportunity, what actually would be the best way of getting this message out there? And the reason I ask you both is because I see the work you do with spreading the message of, like, ideas that are on the cutting edge of psychotherapy, and I don't see other organizations achieving that sort of reach and accessibility in quite the way you do it. And so I just it's something I think about a lot, is like, what if I understand there's a separate question of, is it safe and is it effective, and that's something for the researchers to handle. But my question for you both is, if it is safe and effective, if the opportunity really is a big one, I just want to get your thoughts on, like, what would you, if you were to attack this as like a problem of messaging and marketing and getting a message out there, I just wonder what ideas come to mind for you.
I understand what you're asking now. So you would start with really understanding the audience, the need state, the opportunity for meeting them on their terms at the moments of greatest impact for conversion, you would then be articulating the proposition very well in a language that they understand, that answers that need state or that unmet need in a way that really resonates gently, subtly, and then consistently over time. You would have a strong when we look at, because brand is a really important vehicle for this long-term.
But I think the point is, Emma, this brand exists. It's called ChatGPT, Pi.
It's not brand. There's no brand.
I think the point was is that this exists already. How can we make sure? How would you
wrap it into a campaign for AI? You would create a movement, create a proposition, create a look and feel that sits around it, build meaning, and then
the point is, it's got to be free at point of entry, and it's got to be like it's basically
you would have
years right now, and any of the others.
Yeah, even though you're deploying a free tool, in order to get it in front of someone, you'd have to have a charity or an organization that was going to invest in telling people that this exists, because you can't just say nobody finds it. It's like putting a billboard in a closed cupboard. It won't work.
Or those channels themselves, or those AIs themselves are, because everyone knows that AI makes us more efficient in the jobs that we do in every industry now. We all use AI, right? And so somehow that's got to us. I don't know how that suddenly people have suddenly realized it. I haven't seen any campaigns about, well, actually I have, but that's for specific, teach you to do AI or teach you stuff. But but if you got ChatGPT or someone to say, do you know what, we're making so much money, this is a good point, we could invest a good portion of the money that we're making into doing good in the world. Why don't we just?
But they wouldn't move away from their strategic business objectives to do that. What they would do is there would be some sort of not-for-profit organization, a bit like there is for like the Center for Humane Technology. You would kind of create something that was a vehicle for the deployment of these tools in this context. Because we talked last time about, it doesn't have to be like just Pi or just ChatGPT. There's plenty of AI out there, and some will suit others more than the rest. So you would have this impartial aggregator, advocate, champion who understood the need deeply. So you would have to have a foot in the therapeutic world, and you would want buy-in from the therapeutic world of the utilization and application of this in context. You don't want to be against the industry. And then you would have a foot in the camp of artificial intelligence, and you would find a way to bring those two worlds together to take it to the audience with the need state at the greatest impact. And I would start, if it was me, Steve, and I have not got anywhere near enough data or information or knowledge, but I would go after those markets that were underserved, that is not currently going to kind of take market share.
But the point is as well, and it's really important, Emma, in this, is that an issue is, for so many people, it would need to be someone completely philanthropic who backed this and supported this, because there is the only other people that would want to do it would be wanting to do it to get data from people, and then it becomes completely unethical,
Absolutely.
and
there's been no audit trail, Minter, because the thing is, you're reaching out, so you wouldn't have the data because you're not holding the data. You're just advocating for an approach, perhaps providing help.
Unless it was like ChatGPT or whoever who said, I'll do this.
Exactly. And you would, it's like with any charity or not-for-profit or non-government organization, you have to put those kind of like that ethical framework in before you go anywhere near it. But
the government would be someone who, like an Indian government, for example, would be someone who could say, do you know what, actually we can dedicate some of our budget to just putting a campaign out. I think the British government did something about movement, didn't they? They said that we all had to move, and they put some TV adverts on about get up in your break and move. I can't remember when that was, but they did it. If a government decided to do that and say, look, there's all these tools, why don't you just have a go? That would be a way.
Yeah, look, so thank you for that. There's so many great thoughts. I will just process all of that after the thingy. That's I love all of that. I think it's so true. Like, the funding is a problem. There's no money to be made with this. It's got to be philanthropic for the trust piece. You do need to create somehow a really clear and simple vehicle, but it somehow can't be a product brand, because the product is
It
the thing
could
that's
see
out
it.
there. And
It actually could, and there will be people work. I just want to also caveat is that you could create a brand which is how to use GP, how to use AI in a therapeutic context, and you could. There is a commercial capitalist possibility
okay, love it.
by becoming the default authority on how to utilize AI in that. And so you could then sell that to governments to educate. So I mean, this is a piece of consultancy work that I would love to dive in on, but it is it's bigger than I could
It'd be
give
amazing.
5 minutes. I'm happy to pick it up at another time, but I would
Yeah.
that
Okay.
is something we could definitely. There is an opportunity to commercialize it. So it depends where your intention sits between altruism and
Yeah.
money.
Yeah, hard to commercialize, but yeah, okay, got it. That's amazing. Thank you. Then here's the last thing I want to say, because I think it might be interesting to your readers, to your listeners, to the podcast, right? Throughout my masters, I was constantly asking myself, why is it that there's such a disconnect between academia and the psychotherapy world? All the kind of topics you see at leading psychotherapy conferences, including yours, are almost entirely absent from the world of academia. All the stuff about, like, trauma, internal family systems, psychedelics, polyvagal theory, like all that kind of sort of co-regulation, like all these tools and all these frameworks to make sense of all the kind of, the body keeps a score and Marte's ideas, like, they're just really notably absent. And I every module I did, I was asking, like, why is this? And it's not a conspiracy. It's because the things that have the outsized impact that come up in your conference and others are just so difficult to study, because you can't operationalize them, right? So there's a lot of stuff on CBT in the kind of in the so my master's was the psychology and neuroscience of mental health. Lots of stuff on CBT, DBT, IBT, all these therapies that are quite easy to operationalize. And the reason I mention this is because I think there's a big opportunity here as well. Like, when people use AI for mental health, they don't say, can you give me a CBT session that follows the 12 steps? Or can you tell me, like, the 7 cognitive errors I'm making in the current thing that I'm doing? They don't go with that kind of operationalizable thing. They go more with something much more compassionate and human and fluid and much more similar to the kinds of things that come up in your world and in the psychotherapy world. And it makes me think that there's a bridge to be built here, like that if you want an amazing IFS session, you can just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, be an internal family systems therapist. And, like, I've experienced this myself. I've gone from, like, feeling totally beside myself, 2 exchanges of text later, I'm in tears, and not desperate tears, but, like, releasing tears. And another 4 exchanges later, and something has permanently shifted in me, like, that I've carried with me almost all my life and never came back. It's got that level. And why is that? And it's because, like, these tools, they're not trained on your manual of how to do CBT. They're trained on the entirety of human experience that have been written down, including all the stuff that's been written about leading sort of cutting edge ideas in psychotherapy. And so I just think there's something really, like, profound and powerful in terms of giving. It's like the technology is AI that gives you access to the technology of IFS, or the technology of, like, these ideas of how to do psychotherapy in a very
It's
compassionate and powerful way.
I mean, I wish we had more time again, but we were in Costa Rica with Dick not long ago. And I can't remember if you were still there, Emma, when I think you were, when we were talking about having an AI IFS person and being able to also kind of create these 2 people, this couple who were there, had actually created their, their firefighters, their ex-wives, they'd created their, like, internal family system in with AI. So they'd like drawn them, and they'd come to life for them, and it was just like, and Dick was absolutely loving it. I mean, it was, and there's so much there that they could, and everyone could explore. And
Part three.
like,
Part three. I think it's got to be because I just about you've like put that can of worms in the last 2 minutes. I do have a hard finish, but that is quite. I've got a lot to say on that point.
I'm down if you want. Either way, either way.
I think it's worth it because that's a really valid point, because we're seeing AI as the thing but where's it aggregating the data from? Feed it the models, give it access to learn.
Cat says. Maybe we should get Cat.
Yes. Let's get Kat on part 3 and pick up on that point. Is our friend, colleague on
she's very very deeply in the psychotherapeutic world and very deeply in the AI world. So she's
let's get Kat on the call.
Yeah.
There we go.